Alright, welcome back everybody. This is something that I've been working on for the past couple of months, and this presentation will be called Winter Storm Cycles. So my goal, or the hypothesis first, is can you predict a major ice storm? Now, I live in Georgia, and this will be particularly focused on Metro Atlanta, and my goal is to determine if an ice storm can be predicted. Therefore, I can know when the next ice storm will be coming to Georgia, particularly Metro Atlanta. Not focusing on the mountains of North Georgia, higher elevations. This is going to be focusing on Metro Atlanta, and something that's pretty devastating is an ice storm. And so, in regards to preparedness and being prepared, all things related to that, weather is a big portion of preparedness, and an ice storm is something that can be very devastating and impactful. My first step was to utilize AI, and instead of just spending hours doing research, I started out, let's let the AI do the research. And so my first question that I asked Copilot was, do storms follow cycles? And of course, the first question answered, yes, storms do follow cycles. Okay, great. Now, let's figure out winter storms. Do winter storms follow cycles? Yes, winter storms do follow cycles. All right, great. So there's lots of things that can impact the storm cycles, and so we'll talk more about that. So there's a lot of assumptions of how the weather is impacted, namely the jet stream, weather patterns, Coriolis effect, the eccentricity of rotation around the sun. So that theory is one portion that can impact it. Axial tilt of the Earth, Milankovitch cycles, and of course, just our ocean currents, La Nina and El Nino. And again, most of this historical data comes from NOAA, and then another little study on understanding Earth climate cycles. So again, my focus is on Georgia, so this is something that you're going to take to the rest of the country, but perhaps that cycle would hold true if you did the same study in a different part of the country. But again, focus on Georgia, particularly Metro Atlanta, not the mountains, not the coastal plains, Metro Atlanta. So that's kind of my target for the state. And basically, when I'm going through and pulling this historical data, I focused on ice storms with substantial accumulation. So that's going to be quarter-inch to half-inch of ice. So we get snowstorms occasionally, just snow, no ice, and sometimes we'll get a little bit of rain, and then the ice freezes into ice with the cold temperatures, but that's not what I'm after here. I'm after an ice storm, where ice accumulates on power lines and on tree branches and really just causes a lot of problems for the state. So, historical storms that are in this category. 1973, Georgia ice storm. Yeah, that's an original name. Georgia ice storm. 1982 snow jam. All right, then you get a little more creative. 1993 storm of the century. And then in 2000, we had the Super Bowl, pre-Super Bowl ice storm. And then in 2014, this is probably the one that I remember the most. I remember Storm of the Century as a kid, getting to play in the snow north of Atlanta, and that was really fun. And then, but Snowmageddon and PAX, that's kind of the most impactful ice storm that I remember. I remember driving my two-wheel drive Honda Accord, and middle of the ice and snow, and it was awful. So lots of power outages. Yeah. Okay, so the first thing I did was I plotted all 5 of those storms mentioned in the last slide. And now this blue line represents those storms, and I just put a 10 on my spreadsheet just to mark them as a placeholder, because these orange bars were actually how many inches of snow fell in that particular year. And I think my largest one was like around just over like 10 point something. And so just putting these 5 storms at a value of 10 just made them show up nicely on this graph. So particularly, just kind of look at how the snowfall is. Some years, no snow. Some years, just a little bit of snow. And the snow's not really what I'm after. I'm after these ice storms. I want to know when I'm going to have something major impact my life. So that's what I'm looking for. If we take just the occurrence of these individual ice storms and look at the spacing, you could have some as short as 7 years, some as long as 21 years. Not super helpful in itself, but if you take the average of each of those storms, you come up with a 12-year average. So if you were to project the average forward in time from the last 2014 major ice storm, that would land around 2026. Now, is that early winter in January, February of 2026, or is that December 2026 into 2027? Hard to say. Can't really tell you. But if we were to project just what's happened in the past to try to reflect that into the future, this is what we'd come up with a target. Very interesting. So, just to summarize that data, based on the past 53 years of winter storm data, something that meets a substantial event of quarter to half inch of ice, the average cycle would be 12 years for a major ice storm in Georgia. Now, that puts the target year for 2026. So, that's pretty interesting information in itself, but I want something a little bit more. So, something that I've thought about is, hurricanes, right? So, all that stuff that I mentioned before, La Nina, El Nino, all of that affects hurricanes. So, is there a correlation between hurricane season, like the summer of storm season, and the following winter storm? Like, is there a correlation between when these major events of hurricanes happen and when major ice storm happens? So, first thing I did, asked AI, correlation. There is a potential correlation, but it is not definitive. So, okay, let's do some more digging into this, because that's kind of interesting. So, looking at hurricanes by year. So this is tracking from 1900 till 2024. At the time I was making this, it was the end of 2025, so that data wasn't done yet. But pretty good data, all things considered. So just watch this trend, right? So everything's trending upwards. So the average is increasing. But check out this. So you have these peak seasons, right? Lots of storms, and they kind of have this spacing in between them. Looks like a cycle, right? Check out the troughs. You get these years where like really nothing happens, and you kind of have some cycles to this trough. It's not perfect, but you can see that there's a pattern. So I plotted all of those major snowstorms. Now, granted, there was probably other snowstorm data back here that I just don't have, so this is really going back to 1973. But it's the best I've got. So using 5 data sets, that still gives us something to look at. So check it out. All of these occur near the bottom. They don't occur at the top. They occur at the bottom. I thought, that's interesting. So what happens right before this? So this one had a pretty big hurricane season. This one started to level off, but if you look at these others, right, so it's almost like there's a slowdown in hurricanes leading up to these events. Now, I know we don't have our 2025 data point, but I don't think we had any major named storms hit the U.S. this hurricane season. So I would say this one drops way down, right? So what does that mean? I think that means that for this particular cycle, we're approaching a trough, and we may be at the very bottom of the trough right now. So having said that, that means that we're probably in this zone for a potential ice storm. Now, again, I don't know if that means this is at the end of going to be at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year, because winter kind of rolls into both sides of the year, right? So that's something to think about. But just big picture, if you back out and look at this, you really have to look at your local weather events. So I can't tell you what's going to happen a little bit north of Metro Atlanta, a little bit south of Metro Atlanta, and that's really going to just happen to be related to whatever that storm cycle's doing. Is precipitation being pushed north? Is it being a little more farther south? And you really got to keep in mind that this could be on either side of the year, right? I do remember that Winter Storm Pax was in February, so if you were saying, oh, it's going to happen this year, well, it could be that it's going to be in the 27 portion of the year, going into the new year. But I think what you need to think about is what happened during these previous events, right? If you were there during one of those previous events or multiple previous events, take some of those regrets or things like, oh, I wish I would have had my coat in the car, or oh, I wish I would have had some boots. A lot of people got stranded on the interstate, and that was very unfortunate. So, let's just say you're looking at your weather and you think, oh, there's a chance for some freezing rain. Well, since we're in this zone right here of 2026, I know 2025 is over, but we're in the early winter of 26 now. This falls within the projected target. So if you see the potential for freezing rain, like say in the next weekend or so, you got to keep in the back of your mind, this could be the ice storm. And so, because that's what happened back here in PAX, this one right here, we really got hammered in Georgia. I mean, there were power outages that rocked on for 4 or 5 days, some into a week, and a lot of people didn't see it coming. Of course, day before, all the milk and bread gets bought, but whatever. That's just that's just what happens anytime there's a winter weather scare. But mainly, what I would just like to encourage everybody watching this is, in the spirit of preparedness, and in the community that we find ourselves in, is we like to prepare, right? We want to not be caught off guard by things. So particularly weather events. So when you're looking at potential for power outages, and you're looking at what could happen to you and your community, just keep that in the back of your mind is, what if this is the one? What if this is the year we get the big ice storm? Now, it could be next year. It could be a couple years later. But I would just like to encourage everybody to just treat any potential winter weather that this could be the one. All right, so that's about all I've got for this one. Stay safe out there, and let's just kind of see what happens. But if you have any other ideas of maybe some more data sets that I could get to add to this to make it a little more robust and maybe, better vetted. I'm not a meteorologist. I'm not, any type of weather scientist. I'm just a regular guy trying to figure out when the big one's coming and what I can do to be ready for it. All right. Thank you. Take care.